right, Crim 28, let's knock out the next chapter, which, of course, it doesn't tell me what number it is. I think it's 12. So let's go. 12, yes, career pathways in community corrections. So we're basically going to talk about what it takes to become a probation officer or parole agent in this chapter, and kind of the ins and outs and details about the careers in the chapter. So here's learning objectives, blah, blah, blah. You can read all this. And this guy in 1972 basically came up with his own kind of ideas of the typology, or the different types of supervision officers that he saw working in probation and or parole. I think he was typically talking about probation officers, and sometimes I kind of think these are sort of silly stereotypes, but then at the same time I kind of think about it and go, he kind of has a point. So you do have some different officers, and of course they have different styles, and that kind of obviously is the case throughout life in kind of any type of career. You have instructors. I'm sure some instructors are kind of informal goofballs, kind of like me. You have other instructors that are super strict and very serious all the time, and you have some that never laugh, never smile, never this, never that. They're very by the book. It's the same thing with probation officers, same thing with police officers. You have some that are very by the book, that are going to enforce every rule. You have some that are going to do whatever's easiest for them, the time saver. You have some that are going to try and sit down and change the world in every person that they meet. And then you have others that are going to try and do some of all of that. So of course, there are officers that are going to have different styles. I think, your best officer is the one that does as much of this as they can. Enforce the rules, enforce the law, do it efficiently by saving time, change the world, being therapeutic, and do it all together at once. It is frustrating when you finally get through all the red tape, jump through all the hoops, and become a probation officer or a parole agent, because you want to change the world, you want to help people, you want to make a difference, and you realize that a lot of what you do is never going to get through people's heads. So they're never going to change. But some of them will, and that's going to have to be good enough for you. So anyways, on to the next, less depressing. So this kind of talks about the way probation officers and parole agents are hired. Common requirements. You have to have a bachelor's degree. They call it baccalaureate, which is what it really is. But in order to be a probation officer or parole agent, in almost, certainly in California now, 20-something years ago when I got hired, you didn't necessarily have to have a bachelor's degree to be a probation officer. It helped, and you were a lot more likely to get hired. But there were still a few agencies that didn't require it. I believe most now do require it, though. I know Fresno County does, Tulare County didn't used to, but I think they do now. But a bachelor's degree is almost always required in order to be a probation officer or a parole agent. So that's that 4-year degree. It doesn't necessarily have to be in criminology. So a lot of people think that, oh gosh, I did it in psychology, so I can't ever be a PO. Well, yeah, you still can. Psychology is one of those sciences that's probably close enough. Sociology, sometimes political science, criminology, administration of justice is basically the same thing as criminology. But you absolutely, and if you want to get hired in California and you don't have a bachelor's degree, I think it would be very difficult. But typically you have to have a bachelor's degree, no felony convictions. Depending on what agency you're looking at, a lot of them, even if you have a misdemeanor conviction, it's going to be pretty tough Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it's pretty tough with any kind of conviction. But certainly, most agencies, if you have a felony conviction, they probably wouldn't even consider you. Undergo a background check. So, of course, you have to prove that you don't have a felony. I had to be an American citizen, and there's a lot more to it than just this, but these are some of the typical requirements. And your book talks about the appointment system versus the merit system. In California, typically, we're talking about just the merit system. You're going to test to become a probation officer or parole agent. You're going to take a written exam. You are going to, if you pass the exam, then you move forward with the whole testing process. You will do an oral board interview. You will, if you pass that, then you will take a physical. You'll do a mental health eval, psychological, polygraph, probably do another oral board evaluation. So you'll go before several groups of people and do oral interviews. So there's kind of a lot to it. It's a long process, a lengthy, frustrating, long process. So I'm going to kind of skip through this because we don't really do this. You know, it's all merit system here. You don't get appointed by a judge unless you're the chief. Sorry, I should say that. Unless you're the chief. Typically, the chief probation officer does get appointed by the judges, and that does happen. But other than that, that's the only one that does get appointed by a judge. So these are qualifications that are desired in a good probation officer or parole agent. Basic knowledge of human behavior. That's probably a good skill in any for anybody to have. Good oral and written communication skills. I cannot tell you how important it is to be able to communicate with people. It is of the utmost importance to be able to communicate with people in order to be a good probation officer, or again, in any line of work in this world. To be able to communicate with people is very important. But to be able to verbally communicate and in writing communicate is ridiculously important. Ability to build relationships and establish rapport. Be able to talk to people. You have to be able to find something in common with people and make them at least feel comfortable enough to talk to you. And I think this was one of the things that I was lucky enough to have. I got people to trust me. I also, and I didn't abuse that trust either. That was also something that was important to me, as it should be. You know, if you're a probation officer and you're working with people, having a reputation of being trustworthy is also really important. Being fair, consistent, firm, and respectful. These are all really positive qualifications and traits that you should have. Be knowledgeable about different cultures. We live in a really interesting area here in the Central Valley. We have so many different cultures, and it's really diverse. So learning at least a little bit about all of the different cultures and being able to learn as much as you can, and even learn more when you meet more people, is really important here as well. Being a good time manager, ridiculously important if you have, hundreds of cases. Education and experience, of course, bachelor's degree. Social work, psychology, for most of the people that I know that are in probation and parole or criminology majors. Blah, blah, blah. These are some other things. Weapons qualifications, of course. As a probation officer, I didn't have to show any proficiency toward weapons qualifications until long after I was hired. I don't think I ever did a drug screening. But that doesn't mean you should use drugs, by the way. So just because marijuana is legal for recreational use in the state of California does not mean that it's legal for a probation officer, police officer, correctional officer, or parole agent to use it. These are still things that are not allowed for a person in law enforcement or corrections. But they do psychological evaluations, and these are some other things that are required. So salaries. Okay, so nationwide average in 2013. So when you see a nationwide average, you have to consider that we live in California, so it's going to be higher in California. Probation officer, or correctional treatment specialist, whatever the heck that is, with less than 1 year of experience in 2013, nationwide average starting salary was $35,000. 5 to 9 years, median salary was $40,000. So again, you got to consider this is nationwide, so it's going to be higher than this in California. 10 to 19 years, $46,000 was the median. Again, California is always going to be higher. And 20 years or more, median salary was $58,000. So you are never going to become like Donald Trump rich as a probation officer or a parole agent, but you are never going to be poor. So these are, things to consider. Can you support a family and not worry about where your next meal is going to come from? Being a probation officer or a parole agent? Absolutely. Are you going to buy $1 million house? Probably not. I mean, unless you, I don't know, you're independently wealthy somehow, some other way, or you marry someone who is independently wealthy. So I don't know, but it's good pay. The salary is not bad. You can look at the Fresno County Probation Department website. I want to say when I left, I was line staff. I probably had been there. I had been there almost 20 years. I was probably up to about 70 something. So you can make a decent living. Depends on the agency. If you work for parole, you will make more money in California. Parole administrators. Now, administrators means you are not line staff anymore. You are a boss. So this is what the bosses were making. Parole bosses versus probation bosses. Okay? That's a big difference. Parole makes more money than probation. Parole makes more money than probation. Yes, I worked for probation. Not very smart, huh? Okay, so this is an average. There are some states where probation and parole is combined. Okay, so that's why your book is showing that. They're like one combined agency. That's not how we do it in California. Probation is a county agency, typically, and there is federal probation as well, which kind of confuses everything. And then parole is a state agency. So if you work for parole in California, you work for the state of California. If you work for probation in California, you either work for a county or you work for the feds. Oh, that's interesting how it popped up over here. Pre-service training, blah, blah, blah. When you get, a lot of people ask me this question, to become a probation officer, parole is the same, I believe. You do not go to an academy. I did not go to an academy. Now, parole, you might do an academy type thing, but it's usually after you've been hired. But I got hired by probation in 1997. I did not go through, I went through training, but it was a 6-week training, but after I had already been hired. So you don't go through a police academy. It is a different type of training program called CORE, C-O-R-E, Probation Officer Corps. So, when you are required to do a certain amount of training every year. For me, as a probation officer, I was required to do 40 hours of training per year. I did way more than that, but that's what I was required by law. And that was through peace officers standards and training, I think, post. I don't know why it says state training, but the Bar Association, this is just recommendations from other areas. We did a lot of local training as well, continued education, blah, blah, blah. We did 40 hours of training in Fresno. Okay. So, I'm going to go back to that. I asked, we did a discussion question this last week. And my question was, do you think probation officers and parole agents should be armed? And a couple of you, and I please, I'm not calling anybody out because that's not my intent, said absolutely not, because probation officers and parole agents don't deal with, I think specifically it was probation officers don't deal with violent offenders. So let me tell you, I good friend of mine who happens to be one of my neighbors now, and she also is a probation officer, and I remember this story that she told me a long time ago when we worked together at probation, but she was in the adult division, and she was supervising high-risk offenders at that time. Probation officer, okay? Again, she's a probation officer. And I remember the story she told me about an offender that she was supervising, and she was just disgusted with the case because she was supervising a man who was on probation for literally lighting his wife on fire. He tried to kill her by lighting her on fire. He was on probation. So those of you who think that probation officers are supervising people who stole a pack of gum, people who steal gum are not on probation. People who are embezzling money are typically not on probation. People who try to light their wives on fire are on probation. So if you think that a probation officer is going out to supervise a nonviolent offender, there are some, and don't get me wrong. But probation officers are also dealing with things like that. Next story, I was a probation officer on a high school campus. I was at Hoover High School. I know I've told this to you. A lot of you already know this. But while I was on campus, I was sitting in the police probation office, and we hear over the school radio, Officer Fernandez, I have your probation client with me. This is from a campus security officer. He just pointed a gun at me and threatened to shoot me. So, myself and the police officer are the only two people on that campus at that very moment who had guns, except for my probation client who had just pulled a gun on the campus security officer. So, I do understand there are a lot of people who get very uncomfortable with the whole gun situation. And I get it. I do also remember the first day that I walked out of my house with the gun on my hip, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is a huge responsibility. I mean, I don't want to have to take someone's life. The thought of having to live with that at the end of the day is not something I ever want to deal with. But the thought of leaving my children motherless was also something I never wanted to deal with. So, I do want to point out that we live in a society, in a time where you don't know, especially if you've got a badge on, you don't know if you're coming home at the end of the day or not. So it is, and it's just my point of view, having been a probation officer for 20 years, having had people call me every imaginable name you could possibly think, people who did not even know me, who I had no dealings with. I just happened to drive by them, walk by them, be near them, just and have a badge on. I was grateful that I had a gun with me, because I was going home at the end of the night. And I know that one of the students in the class, and you know me, I know you, he was in my class before. He mentioned the story that, I said, I'm going home to my kids at the end of the night. And anyways, but firearms are something that needs to be considered. Not all agencies have armed probation officers and parole agents. If you're getting arrested, that can be a very, very emotional time. Can be uncertainty, a lot of confusion, anxiety, and it can be a really dangerous time. And probation officers and parole agents are arresting people every day. So, I know I just got all deep there, but anyways, some agencies do carry, some don't. Fresno County absolutely does, and I don't know that I would go out in the field in Fresno County if I were not an armed officer. I'll be real honest. Seeing the amount of violence that takes place in Fresno on a daily basis, it's crazy. Anyways, there's the arguments against, and you can see there's a lot of reasons why you would not want an officer to carry a gun. I get it. I mean, am I threatening if I go on a high school campus with a gun on? Yeah, I could be. I mean, I'm really not, because I'm just, I look like their grandma walking around with a gun on, but you know what I mean. Are they really needed? Do I really need to have a gun if I'm going to be walking around a bunch of high school students? And of course, my answer was, for me, it was yes. Because guess what? One of my students, who knew I was looking for him, brought a gun to school and threatened a campus security officer with it. Thank God he bolted. He jumped the fence and took off. But the school went on lockdown. It was insane. It was a crazy day. Nobody got hurt. But if I'd been there without a gun that day, or if the kid had approached me, that would have been the worst day of my life, because I would have shot him and I probably would have killed him. And I still get chills thinking about that day. Anyways, but is it really necessary? Or, me walking up with a gun to approach one of my clients, does that make the whole encounter more aggressive? Does that, does it change things right off the bat? I don't know. So I see it. I know there's a lot of arguments for and against. So anyways, I did wear body armor every single day. I was trained in self-defense techniques. We did all this stuff. I don't care how old I was. Every year we did weaponless defense. We did weapons retention training. You name it, we did it. And I did it gladly, knowing that I was going to come home safe. Ongoing liability. Not all officers do want to carry firearms. That's true also. We also carried chemical agents. We did not have stun guns. We did pressure point training. We did all that kind of stuff as well. There's lots of stress involved, paperwork, lack of promotional opportunities, not enough time with those huge caseloads. Yes, role ambiguity, am I their social worker or am I the enforcer? Should I be kind and understanding or should I arrest them? Then if I do arrest them, is the court going to lock them up? What's the court going to do? Am I wasting my time? Am I not getting recognized for the hard work I do? Or am I going to get sued? There's all this other stuff. If I get sued for doing my job, is my department gonna back me up? Am I gonna end up in jail for doing my job? Do I have protection against? Do I have absolute immunity? Do I have qualified immunity? If I follow the rules, follow department policy, follow the orders of the court, and follow the law? Am I going to be okay? Fear of being sued is another thing that's a really big deal when you are working in the criminal justice system at all. But certainly in the corrections, probation, and parole. Can you ever be liable? Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. And private probation, not real common here in California, so I'm not going to spend very much, if any, time on it, because I went way over telling you all my super interesting stories. Okay. Criticisms of private probation privatization. Boom. Okay, we're done.